I very much enjoyed the opportunity in recent months to talk about monetary policy. The last time I discussed monetary policy at any length was about 4 decades ago, and that was over a period of 4 or 5 years. My point then was that it was a huge mistake to see monetary policy as a static problem of engineering the desired balance between unemployment on the one hand and inflation on the other hand. I argue that optimum policy solves a dynamic problem. It forgoes the temptation of short-term benefits in order to keep a lid on the expected inflation rate, and it invests in a temporary cutback of jobs to lower the expected inflation rate if the expected inflation rate is initially too high. Now, everybody on Bloomberg and CNBC understands that monetary policy aims to manage inflation expectations. But how much do they really understand about monetary policy? And how much do we understand about what the actual monetary policy these days is? I think there are 2 basic questions. One question, as I was just suggesting, is what the policy is these days, or at least what the policy is not. Is current policy consistent with the Taylor rule? I'll define that a little bit later for those of you who are not specialists in macroeconomics or monetary economics. Or can we infer that the rule these days is definitely not the term the Taylor rule? The other question is what policy ought to be, or at least what changes in policy could we agree would be better. I'm going to have in mind principally Federal Reserve monetary policy of the Fed, but I hope that my commentary may have some applications to policy at some other central banks as well. European central bank. Now, it's going to take a little while to set the stage, but I think that setting the stage is so to speak, half the battle. So it's worth taking some time with that. And once that's done, I will argue that the present policy discussion is confused in invoking the Taylor rule to explain the cut of interest rates to a low level, when, as I see it, a more circumspect, a more insightful application of the Taylor rule would not call for an interest rate cut, might call for an interest rate hike. But then I will go on to argue that the Taylor rule itself is unconvincing in calling for a cut in the current real expected interest rate in relation to the natural real rate, with each increase of the unemployment rate in relation to the medium-term natural unemployment rate. In any case, the Taylor rule is lacking in operational content until it is logically completed by some sort of model of the natural real interest rate, a moving anchor in relation to which the Taylor rule would have the central bank set the expected real interest rate. Such a research agenda points in the direction of Hayek and the notion of neutral money. Okay, let me begin by talking about the structural shifts that have been going on in the American economy and to some extent in several other important economies, what is sometimes called the West. It's a pity that a large segment of the public has been taught to diagnose every downturn of employment from what seemed to be a sustainable employment level as a decrease of aggregate demand, or what Keynes called effective demand. That kind of understanding of employment downturns tempts the Federal Reserve, the Fed, to comment on its policy in terms of aggregate demand. This in turn makes it hard or impossible to grasp what may be the Fed's thinking on underlying structural forces that might lie behind the downturn. You never get past the rhetoric of aggregate demand. I see four primary sources of structural contraction over 2007 and 2008. First, the end of the housing boom. Mention of housing invariably reminds us that a large part of the shoot-up of house prices in the United States, as well as some other countries, UK even more, has proved to be a bubble. In one respect, though, the talk of this bubble misses a significant point. Even without a bubble, there would have remained a strong rise of house prices from early 1997 to early 2007. So a boom in home construction would have occurred as a result of the justifiable component in the total price rise. By this justifiable component, I mean the component that rests on the anticipation of higher future demand that would support a larger stock of second homes and better homes. Much of that increased demand for housing, of course, would in turn rest upon the strong rise of wealth and productivity from the early 1990s up to, especially from 1995 up to about 2005. And this sort of, and this justifiable component of the boom would have come to an end once the expansion of the stock of houses was completed. Home construction would subside to the level needed to house the annual increase in population and to replace the part of the existing housing stock that reached the end of its useful life. The price mechanism would not require house prices to drop at all. This would be just a smooth transition from one price path for houses to a higher price path for houses. Another structural force driving the operating to contract economic activity is the end of the bubble component of the price increase in houses that I acknowledged before. Between 30% and 40% of the rise in house prices from 1997 to 2007 appears to have been a bubble in the United States. With the bursting of the bubble in 2007, since that time, the housing market has been giving back. It's been in the process of giving back